I am.
Before we get into this week's podcast, I want to address the situation with Jonathan Majors, as we are going to be discussing Creed 3 at some point during our upcoming podcast. It's really tough to talk about movies these days without some of the complications of the stars and some of the negative things that certain individuals are choosing to do with themselves. And there have been some significant allegations made by Jonathan Majors' girlfriend in the city of New York. As we are recording this podcast, that case is still pending, and they are allegations. Jonathan Majors and his attorney have officially denied any wrongdoing whatsoever. But there are allegations made by his girlfriend, and recently there was allegations made in Rolling Stone, over 40 people speaking out against Jonathan Majors and alleged physical and verbal abuse. So as we talk about Creed 3, we will be talking about it, I would say, briefly, regardless of where it is on our lists, and we will be avoiding conversation of Jonathan Majors if at all possible. But I wanted to address that situation specifically here at the beginning of this episode so that you know what's up. So without any further ado, here is the rest of our podcast ranking the Rocky and Creed movies. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Pantheon Plus. My name is Jerome Cuson. I'm one of the hosts of this podcast. On today's episode, we will be reviewing and discussing all 9 of the Rocky Creed movies, and we will be ranking them just as we did last week. We did with the 5 Die Hard movies. Please leave a 4 or 5-star review so as to help people discover the great work that we are doing here at The Real World. Of course, you can also follow us on social media. Find us on social media. We will be establishing a Threads account pretty soon, I think. So definitely check that out. Find me, Jerome Cuson, on Threads. Probably will not. I may not have a Twitter by the time this podcast comes out, but we'll see. My co-host, of course, is Brian DeBrain. Brian, this week we are going to be discussing the 9 Creed Rocky movies. And I know that this is, Die Hard was a nice warm-up, but we kind of knew where everything was going to go, and I don't think there was a lot of drama. But this week, Brian, I feel like we're going to be getting into the weeds a little bit. There's 9 of these to review and to rank, and I am very excited for us to be discussing the 9 Rocky/Creed movies. I know this is one you have been very much looking forward.
Yeah, I feel like ever since Creed came out in 2015, there's been this resurgence in me and this love for the Rocky franchise that kind of died down a little bit. When going back to around 2014, 2013, you kind of felt at that time Rocky Balboa was going to be it, and that was kind of it. And then Creed comes out and just kind of restarts the franchise, reignites the love of the franchise, creates a whole new awesome character for a whole new generation to attach themselves to. And we know that's working because the amount of money that the Creed franchise has made since then shows that people have responded to Michael B. Jordan in this new role as the son of Apollo Creed, with Rocky in that mentor role. So this transition from the old guard to the new guard, I think, has been perfect. And usually a lot of movies kind of stumble with that in terms of different franchises, in terms of handing down the torch. But in this case, I think it's been done perfectly in a sense that even the last movie that has come out in the series didn't have Rocky in it. But I think in that case it still worked. But you can still bring him back at any point, I think, for certain things. But that just kind of shows you the strength of the character that Michael B. Jordan as Creed Jr. kind of like has put himself and established himself as the central character now. And people have gotten behind him. So I think that the torch has been passed. And now you can look back at the legacy in this transition and see the kind of like the beginning with Rocky all the way to Creed now. So I think it's a great franchise, and it's this great generational legacy that's kind of attributed to the franchise. And I think that's why people still to this day kind of, go to it and kind of like like not just, the younger generation, but of course going with like a grandpa or grandma kind of reminiscing. And then when they see Rocky on screen, they pop themselves. So, you know what I mean? It's very much a generational thing. And I think this franchise has brought a lot of generations together for it.
So I'm going to start off with a hot takey question for you, Brian. Are we sure that the Rocky Creed franchise hasn't told a better story over 9 movies than the Skywalker saga?
See, I think it is a little better because, look, despite our mixed feelings of certain Star Wars movies, I think there's more consistency in the writing here in the Rocky franchise because Ryan Coogler came in and kind of reestablished the character and kind of reinvented the character for the modern audience and turned Rocky into the sympathetic figure that we know him as now. And it took a while to see him as that sympathetic figure. So, yeah, I think I would say like it's a better arc, and it's not just the Skywalkers, quote unquote. It's the Creed family and the Rocky families coming together, and it's kind of this generational thing, like I mentioned. So, I think it works very well, and similar amount of movies, I guess, so to speak, of the family franchises. But yeah, I think Creed has the better writing with the Rocky franchise as well, combining them together. And I think you get a better story arc than the Star Wars ones. And if you kind of look at the directors, I would say, I don't know. I'd say there's more talent in the Rocky side of the franchise in terms of directors than the Star Wars side.
Yeah, I mean, we could certainly go back and forth on that. I'm not sure about Sylvester Stallone as a director all the time, but I think we could agree that we've enjoyed most of these movies. But for me, I kind of have these in 4 tiers. I think, my first 2 kind of there are 2 movies from the Rocky Creed franchise that are in my 100 favorite movies of all time. And I would say that that's my top tier. And then I'd say I have like a second tier. The next 2 movies I would say are really, really strong and probably 2 of the best sequels that are in the franchise. And then I have a tier 3, which I would say good and enjoyable, not the best. I've got 3 movies in that tier. And then I've got the bottom tier of 2 movies, Brian. 2 movies in my bottom tier. I have a feeling we know what they are. We may even have the same 2 in this bottom tier, but will we have the same number 1? That's the question as we go into this list. So, Brian, without any further ado, if you have nothing else to say about the franchise generally, let's get to our number 9 pick. So how we're going to do this is Brian will reveal his number 9. He will talk a little bit about it. Then I will do my number 9, unless they are the same. If they are the same, we will declare it as such, and then we can just talk about the movie at the same time. But Brian, what is your number 9 pick? There is not a lot of drama, but just say it.
Rocky 5, and
I have the same.
Disagreement, right?
Same. Yes.
Okay. So, well, I can actually speak to this recently because I just bought a GameCube and I bought the Rocky game, right? And of course, that only goes up to Rocky 5, and the main boss at the end of the game. I played it on easy mode, folks. Whatever. I played it on easy mode. I spammed the left jab, and I got about a bunch of 10-8 rounds. No one can touch me, right? It was easy mode. But at the end, you are in street fight mode against Tommy, and it's just as cheesy as it sounded and when I said it, and it's just as cheesy as it looked when it was in the movie. And I was just like, damn it, why can't they, out of all the things they changed for the Rocky game in terms of history, they couldn't have made this one in the ring, and they had to just make it a street fight like I don't know, because again, the one thing that bothers me about Rocky 5, a lot of things bother me about Rocky 5, but the fact they didn't end it in the ring or some kind of like in-ring thing, it had to be a street fight that just looked goofy, and I never liked it, and I never liked the I don't know. I feel bad saying this, but the relationship that he had with his kid in that movie was kind of weird, because I don't know if the whole idea of him training to fight bullies is a good idea. I don't know. I don't know if that's a positive thing. But and then again, it feels like Adrian's in the background in the movie, completely lost. And you wasted Elton John singing the song in the movie in a very unmemorable Elton John type song, which is very shocking for Elton John. But I guess at the time he was really high on cocaine, because that's before he went to rehab, apparently. So yeah, there's a lot of things going on with this movie that's so wrong, but goddamn, it could have been so right, because they brought back the original director, but I guess that didn't really matter.
Rocky 5 is undoubtedly the worst movie in this franchise, and I think there are 3 major reasons for that, and I'm going to kind of go in order of which I think they are. So starting with number 1, I think setting them up, having Rocky and Adrian be poor again, I think that was a fundamentally bad choice. and having Rocky be retired also because of concussions. Like, it's just a very front-loaded movie with a lot of depressing stuff. And I think that Rocky Balboa just handles it so much better. Like, Rocky Balboa is a depressing movie, but I never feel like it's hopeless, and there are times in this movie when it just feels hopeless. The other cardinal sin of this movie, which naturally leads into number 2, is casting Tommy Morrison as Tommy Gunn is a fatal sin of this movie. If you are not invested in Tommy Gunn as a character, then Rocky 5 is just not going to work for you. And I think that the biggest difference between Rocky 5 and Creed is Michael B. Jordan is a significantly better actor than Tommy Morrison, which is kind of an obvious point, but it's one worth mentioning because Tommy Morrison is terrible in this role. It fundamentally does not work. The character is just very unlikable from the beginning. I don't buy his performance. I don't buy the Don King knockoff. I think the Don King knockoff is a cartoon, does not fit in with they're seemingly trying to go back to the quote unquote streets of Philadelphia, but then you have these cartoonish characters in terms of Tommy Morrison as well as the Don King knockoff.
His name is George Washington Duke. Please give some respect to that stupid name.
I mean, he's really bad. I know he's been in other things and isn't terrible, but in this movie, I don't know who to blame, but it's just really bad. And then, of course, unfortunately, I'm not putting the blame on Sage Stallone, but casting your son in this movie is another fatal sin. 1990 saw 2 major examples of prominent stars or directors and producers putting their kids in the movie and having the performances be really bad. We had The Godfather 3 with Sofia Coppola. We had Rocky 5 with Sage Stallone. I don't know what it says that Emilio Ventimiglia was a better son to Rocky than Rocky's actual kid, but it's absolutely true. This just, it didn't work. And I think for all those reasons, I think that's why Rocky 5 ends up being a disaster. It could have been even worse because one of the endings that was teased at one point was actually killing Rocky Balboa. And my God, if Rocky 5 ends with Rocky's death, this franchise is DED dead. There is no Creed franchise if that happens. So in some ways, I'm almost relieved that Rocky didn't die.
And to think Talia Shire's in both Godfather 3 and Rocky 5 is just, oh man, I feel bad for that kind of casting back to back. But look, I mean, I like a lot of Godfather 3. It's just, it gets tiresome, and I still haven't watched the new director's cut, even though I have it on DVD or Blu-ray still. But man, just bad luck for her. But then I didn't even like Burgess Marathon coming back. I thought that was just, when I watched it as a kid, I was like, okay, he's a ghost. But then you realize as you grow older, he's not really a ghost. He's just a flashback. And it's just like so unnecessary and so out of place with that flashback. Yeah, that I just wish Burgess Meredith would not have came back for that stupid flashback. There's a lot of things I would have done differently about this movie. I don't even know if I would have just done Rocky 5 at this point in time, or maybe I just would have waited for everyone to kind of age and get that, get the little seasoning in them. Kind of, because this was still fresh from Rocky 4, it felt like, and it was still like, yeah, it kind of felt like they were kind of shaking off the sports entertainment MTV vibe of the franchise and trying to get it back to its roots, and it just right.
Backfired. We are exiting the Ronald Reagan stage of like the big muscled up action star, and we're like trying to sort of either go back, but also perhaps try and enter a new era, and it didn't work. Rocky 5 was pretty much a complete disaster. So we have the same number 9 movie. Brian, anything else to say about Rocky 5? If you don't, then reveal your number 8 pick, and let's see if we have the same number 8.
Well, really quick, just going back to my Elton John rant, I always felt like Philadelphia Freedom was like the perfect song for the Rocky franchise, and I always imagined it as being in the Rocky franchise. And if you've never heard that song, it's an awesome Elton John song from the 70s. And you'll think to yourself, like, why was this never in the Rocky franchise? And then he does an original song for Rocky 5 that is just so unmemorable that it's not even any on like the Elton John compilations as like his best or greatest hits or anything like that. So that kind of tells you the songwriting level of Elton John at the time in 1990. So yeah, that's kind of my rant on Elton John and the Rocky franchise. Number 8, my pick is Rocky 2. And when I was younger, I used to love this movie a lot, but as I grown older, I felt like it's just it gets kind of boring in the middle. And I feel like there's an hour you can just cut out and attach that other hour to Rocky 1 and just make Rocky 1 this epic 3-hour movie. But you're kind of stuck with two Rocky films, Rocky 1 and 2, that are kind of extensions.
Rocky 2 is also my pick for number 8. And I think this one actually makes me angrier in some ways because, look, I can accept that Rocky 5 is really bad. There's just fundamentally bad decisions all around. But here, like, you've got Rocky 1, which is an Academy Award winner. I think Rocky 2 is a sneakier bad movie. It's not as bad as Rocky 5, don't get me wrong. But I think there are elements of this that are sneaky in just how bad they are. I think there are a number of bad decisions with this movie as well. For me, Brian, here's the biggest one. So, you and I both, of course, wrestling fans, we make wrestling references on just about every episode. Do you not agree with me that a cardinal sin is that Creed is the one that actually wants the rematch and Rocky wants to retire and go away? Like, to me, the whole essence of the movie is you want the babyface to want the rematch and the heel to do everything he can to avoid it. I mean, you even have the out with Creed saying there would be no rematch at the end of Rocky 1. So to me, the fun thing about Rocky 2 would be if Rocky was chasing Creed and Creed eventually just has to relent and finally give him the rematch. Like, either Rocky is doing other fights and beating people or doing other such things. But having Rocky do all these crappy commercials, it's so bad. And it makes Rocky look like a chump as well. And of course I can't not talk about this movie and not talk about Adrian being the biggest wet blanket in the world. I think this movie is a character assassination of Adrian. I don't blame Talia Shire. I think she's doing the best that she can, but I'm going to make the joke anyway. The best acting she does in this movie, sadly, is when she's in a coma.
Yeah, that always rubbed me the wrong way. I don't know what it is. I felt like randomly in a coma just from stress from working. It's like, I don't know.
It's stress of being pregnant and working, which I understand.
I get you, but it's so convenient for the dramatic moment, and then for her to come out of it at that exact moment. You know what I mean? It's like it was just too emotionally manipulative. I felt like even for a Rocky franchise. You know what I mean? It's like. And then I don't know, and then just this idea of him not finding a job and already right off the bat being, bad with money. And you mentioned the money's in the chase, right? Like, so to speak. I get that, but for some reason, it just doesn't seem like Rocky wanted to win the title anyway. He just wanted to like prove that he's, tough and he can, withstand and go toe to toe with the champion. It never felt like he ever wanted the world title at any point in any of the franchise without, you know what I mean? Like even in 3 or 4. The title seemed to be kind of secondary to Rocky. It was all about just being the best. And when we'll get to Rocky 3, we'll talk about how I think it's more of a grindhouse movie than anything. But in terms of Rocky 2, I just felt like it's 2 hours. You could cut like an hour 10 out of it, combine it with Rocky 1. And I always like got confused as a kid when I watched Rocky 2 as like on TV and stuff. I would think this was like the first Rocky. And it turns out that I watched Rocky 2 before Rocky 1 thinking it was the first Rocky. So, yeah, that's how they always blend together, those two. And I felt like by the end of it, him winning the title, that should have just been the end of the first Rocky. And Rocky 1 should have been this 3-hour epic. With him like halfway.
I don't know. I think to me, I really like that he doesn't win at the end of the first one because that the first movie is very specifically about his journey of both self-acceptance, but also realizing that what he really wants is to be with Adrian and the title doesn't matter. So I don't like the idea of.
See, that's the thing. It's like if the title doesn't matter, should we even have him chase the title?
But I think you can reframe it. Like Creed can say something. You can do something.
Well, that's the thing. He made it personal because he knew Rocky wasn't really interested in the title. I think that's what they.
You could have Rocky and Adrian like get together in Rocky 2, and you could be like it's nagging at him. Like, yes, he's happy. Yes, he's satisfied. But like, there's just this part of him that wants, and like, I think that Rocky 3 and Rocky 4 both get into this idea of it's not about the title. It's about proving that you're the best. And it's about that hunger to fight. And I think that's kind of been the theme of this franchise after Rocky 2. They actually do, I think, a much better job of getting into that. And I think if they had gotten to that place in Rocky 2, I think Rocky 2 ends up being a significantly better movie.
I think Adrian should have wanted him to win the title, but it doesn't feel like she still. Like at the end, she was proud of him, but I don't think she's like cared either way. But I think if there was a scene where she's like, "I want you to win the title for me," that would have made it even better. I think, but they didn't do that because
they can never make their minds up, because it feels like in Rocky 2 she doesn't want him to fight. In Rocky 3 she wants him to fight, and then in Rocky 4 she doesn't want him to fight again. Which I think Rocky 4 probably makes the most sense because, I mean, Drago literally murders Creed in the ring. So I think that makes sense, but it oscillates back and forth, and it's really strange.
Yeah. And that's kind of where I guess we kind of like, we're even on that point. I think that's kind of where we're at on Rocky 2, where it's like unsatisfying, could have been better, and it's just too long. Like I feel it's way too long even for 2 hours, right? Like it just feels like it's just dragging in the middle until you get to the final, like, okay, I accept your challenge. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I would love to see a 90-minute cut of Rocky 2. Like, I'd love to see Stallone go back into the old editing bay and chop this sucker down. And yeah, all right. So you have had a chance to reveal your 9 and 8. They're both the same as mine, but I want to take a turn. I want to reveal my number 7. See if we have the same number 7. Are you ready?
Ready.
My number 7 is Rocky 4.
Interesting. It's close on that list too, but mine's Rocky 3.
Okay, so Rocky 3 is actually my number 6. So here's what we'll do. Let's talk about Rocky 3 first, because I think it's a nice follow-up conversation from Rocky 2. So why is it, Brian, that you like Rocky 3 more than Rocky 2?
I think it's because it's the sports entertainment, kind of like they lean into more of that MTV. It's not even MTV at that point, I don't even think, but just very like what ESPN, what kind of evolved into, that flashy kind of feel. You really get that with the training montage in front of like the crowd. And then you got Burgess Meredith going, "We need to get out of here, Rocky. We need to go back to our training roots. This is too flashy." You know what I mean? Like I like that aspect of it, and I like the aspect of like him fighting a wrestler. His celebrity's getting so big that he's doing freak show fights with Hulk Hogan at the time. You know what I mean? Just like crazy shit like that. So it kind of like takes it from a backstep from the drama, takes it more into the sports entertainment realm, and I really enjoyed that. But at the heart of it, I feel Rocky 3 is basically a grindhouse movie, right? Mr. T comes in, he wants a match. His trainer dies. He kind of blames Mr. T for the death of his trainer, right? He loses the first fight. He trains up, gets his revenge, and then wins the title. That sounds like a grindhouse movie without like murder or death, but just boxing in it. So to me, Rocky 3 has always been this grindhouse movie to me. And like, it's fun and it's very sports entertainment, but it doesn't really have the drama as the original, which is fine. But I think Rocky 4 actually elevates the drama a little bit based on the death of Apollo Creed and everything. But in this case, when they killed off Burgess Meredith, I just felt like, dude, you just killed off one of the best parts of the franchise just to, I don't know, just to get revenge on him. And then what are you going to do with the fourth one? And then they kind of repeated the formula.
I mean, to an extent, I mean, that's kind of what the Rocky franchise is. But I understand killing Burgess Meredith's character because, like, you really need to send Rocky to this bottom. And I think it's hard. I mean, I think it's hard to create this drama without kind of repeating yourself. I enjoy Rocky 3 because it is nowhere near the top of the franchise, but for me, it's I think there's enough good elements. I think I love Mr. T in this movie, even though Clubber Lang is barely a character. I think Mr. T is just perfect casting, and the stuff with Hulk Hogan I think is pretty amusing. I just want to point out that even in this movie, Hulk Hogan doesn't do the job. So I'm just saying. Needs to be pointed out.
Dutch Lips does not do the job, brother.
Clearly not. And Paulie's also really racist in this movie. So I don't think that's necessarily a positive thing, but there are some aspects to this movie that really have me questioning Sylvester Stallone's personal beliefs, because it gets a little dicey when they go to the west coast of Los Angeles, and you don't feel that when Ryan Coogler is behind
Look,
The
I'll
campus
say this:
roast.
when Paulie's in Rocky Balboa, I think the point is like you're not supposed to act this way. He's one of those old crazy uncles you have in the family that are just kind of like old school racist that you're just supposed to ignore and not take any good advice from at that point in their life. And I think that's where they kind of turn the character with this, because it feels like in the next coming Rocky movies, Paulie just becomes kind of worse and worse. But the point is, you're not supposed to be like Paulie. He's supposed to be this like example of what not to do.
I mean, Paulie literally gets arrested too, so he's kind of a shitty human being. Here's an underrated part of Rocky 3 that I always appreciate, and this is like a complete throwaway. But do you remember the moment when he's after the fight with Clubber and he's on his motorcycle and he's in front of the statue and he throws his helmet, it hits the statue right in the head?
Oh, dude, they brought that scene back for the director's cut of Rocky 4, and I was like, oh, that's great.
That is a great scene,
Yeah.
a complete throwaway. I am so curious to know how many takes that took because he nailed him. It's a great scene, and again, kind of a throwaway. But yeah, I enjoy Rocky 3 thoroughly. It is number 6 on my list. So, Brian, for you, why is Rocky 4 higher for you on this list?
I gotta admit, it's probably because of Creed 2 and Creed 1. Just bringing that story back and making the Apollo Creed death much more of a story than we just kind of brushed it off to be as like a revenge kind of tale. And now he's got this kid that, was just kind of left behind, you know what I mean? And that became Michael B. Jordan's character. So in Rocky 4, I mean, even with the director's cut, I know we're not counting the director's cut, but there's some stuff in there some scenes that kind of just made it, like it elevated the drama to where it felt like it was closer to what Rocky 1 was feeling like. And that's kind of where there's a point in the director's cut where I forget the name of the trainer, but Apollo Creed's trainer, he goes to Russia with Rocky, right? And he's training him. And then there's this one point which they cut out of the original version where he's like, I'm going to train you now, and everything that I taught Creed, I'm going to teach to you. And it became this emotional thing where, like, at that moment, Rocky knew that he's got this new trainer that wants similar to Burgess Meredith, someone that's going to look out for him. And they really kind of like abandoned that relationship in 5, which I thought was kind of disappointing. But they really built that in 4, and then they really went back to it. They go back to it in 6 for sure, but in this case, like I just was like, wow, like there's this really great drama going on. And the funeral stuff they cut out was just kind of like disappointing, and then the director's cut really heightened that. So yeah, and then I think the ending, the speech is corny as it is, but I think also the fact that this soundtrack is probably the most prominent, most popular soundtrack of one of the most popular soundtrack of the 80s. One of the most popular soundtracks of all time, definitely the best soundtrack of all the Rocky movies and the Creed franchise. So you add that to it, like it kind of has this historical kind of value to it as well. So there's a lot going on for this movie, and especially like, I mean, it's so iconic nowadays that anytime you see like a giant Russian on screen that's blonde, it's like, oh, they're doing the Ivan Drago, and it's kind of like collectively known as like the Drago role. So, it's very significant in terms of history, and whether or not it ended the Cold War or not, that's up for debate. But yeah, and I would strongly recommend that director's cut.
I think that for me, I think undoubtedly the Creed part of this franchise has elevated Rocky 4. I think it's given it a lot more pathos, and that certainly elevates the movie for me. So you got to give Ryan Coogler a ton of the credit on that one. Look, Rocky 4 is a cartoon. Like, we have gone fully from Rocky 1 being this gritty 70s underdog sports movie to Rocky 4 just straight up being American propaganda. And I think it's kind of well done propaganda at times. There's a lot of montages, but boy, oh boy, is this an easy watch? I think that's the fun of the movie, is that it's a pretty easy watch, even when you're watching Creed get just destroyed. I have to say, I think this is a good time to talk about Tony Burton. Tony Burton, I think, is kind of the unsung hero of this franchise. I think if you look at each one of the movies he's in, I think he gets a really great moment. I think back to Rocky 1, when Creed is going through this idea of fighting Rocky, and Duke is like, nope, kid shouldn't do it. He's a southpaw. It's a great subtle moment. Rocky 4 has him saying throwing the towel. Rocky Balboa has him talking about throwing hurt bombs and things of that nature. So yeah, Tony Burton is a great contributor, and I'm glad that they cast Wood Harris to play his son, so that Duke can live on in some ways. And yeah, I mean, again, this as much as we talk about like the Creed family and the Balboa family, like Duke's family also. I mean, you've got two generations that have also been a part of this franchise as well. So it's three families that have kind of really dominated this. And yeah, that's my thoughts on Rocky IV, which is it's fun, but it's definitely it's not as great as the other movies on this list. So again, Rocky IV is my number 7. Your number 7 is Rocky III. My number 6 is Rocky III, and yours is Rocky IV. So we've got a little bit of disagreement there. But Brian, why don't you tell me what is your number 5 movie, as we are just about at the halfway point?
This was kind of like the most difficult decision, actually, because it was hard weighing these two movies out, and I'm gonna go with number 5, Rocky Balboa. Now, originally it was in Creed 2 was in that spot, and I switched it out only because, again, I just kind of have this new love for Dolph Lundgren and the way he's kind of grown as an actor. So that storyline kind of outweighed it for me. But in Rocky Balboa, we mentioned when we reviewed it, like we kind of wish it didn't end with a fight, and that's kind of where it's up to that point. It's great, like it's grounded. He's you're sympathizing with him. He's like the local legend that's looking out for the people in the city or the kids in the city, that kind of thing, or in his block or whatever. And he's taking care of the people. So I'm digging all of that. But then him in the fight, we talked about how it's like he was so lucky in that fight, getting all the breaks and stuff. And, the fact that his opponent got a broken, I think it was an arm or whatever. And
broken ribs. Mason the Line Dixon broke his ribs.
Broke his ribs, and, he took advantage of it. And it was just so convenient, right? But everything before that was great. Like the stuff with him, with the council was great. So I just love this more grounded, return to form for Rocky, where it's just kind of focusing on him and his kind of like, where he's at now kind of thing. It didn't need a fight. It had the fight, and it's kind of like that's his last fight. But it was pretty solid, the ending. But I would say Creed 2 has the more emotional connection, I think, because of what, the fact that they brought Dolph Lundgren back and all that stuff. So we can get into that when we talk about that.
So my number 6 is Creed 2, and my number 5 is Rocky Balboa. So we've done the old switcheroo again. I'm just going to talk about Creed 2 for a minute here. I think for me, Creed 2 was a little bit of a disappointment when I first saw it. I think there are certainly some good parts to it, but you really do feel the fact that Ryan Coogler is not behind the camera, and that is no disrespect to the Creed 2 director, but I just don't think that this movie is as consistent. I still think there's some really good elements. I do like kind of the role that Rocky plays in Creed 2, and the farewell that they give him at the end with the cameo from Rocky Jr., so to speak. So I like the fact that they kind of ended Rocky's story in a logical way here with Creed 2. The Drago of it all, I have mixed feelings. Like, I think it's kind of an obvious thing that you kind of have to do because of the way the way that Rocky 4 ended. I think the fact that Creed 3 completely goes in a different direction makes me less dubious of this choice, because it's not just Creed fighting all of Rocky's old opponents. So I really like that Creed 3 kind of separates itself. But I think Creed 2, a nice ending to the Rocky story, a nice continuation of the Drago story, which also we have a fourth family, I guess you could say, Brian. So in some ways, this movie really is about fathers and sons, I guess. And I think Creed 2 does a really good job of the follow-up and kind of transitioning Michael B. Jordan as Creed into kind of this different character fighting for the heavyweight title. The vicious disqualification, which even in the theater I winced when Drago got disqualified and why he got disqualified. That is a pretty nasty disqualification.
Yeah, that was pretty brutal, but at the same time, it's like you end up forgiving him at the end because, his dad throws in the towel and stuff like that. So to me, like, I think, again, just seeing Ivan Drago come back, and then Dolph Lundgren just having that come. Did he have Aquaman that year too? Like, that was the same year, right? So
it was a great year for Dolph, and
comeback. We talked about that. So it's not like he hasn't like his acting skills have gotten worse. He's clearly gotten better. And coincidentally, as of this recording, a week ago, Jerome texted me about Johnny Mnemonic that he was watching, and he sees Dolph Lundgren in this crazy priest like role or whatever, and he's just acting like hamming it up. And then you see him in this role, and it's like, wow, he clearly turned it around. Like he figured it out, and sometimes it takes a while to get to that level. And I'm not saying he's like this amazing actor. I think he's a very good actor now, and that's great for the growth he's had in his career compared to where he was when he first did Rocky 4. So seeing this and then that face to face at the Italian restaurant with him and Rocky, dude, I remember the crowd in my audience going, and just like that moment, you know what I mean? It's kind of like when Brett and Sean had a face to face all those years later. That same feeling, and I was just like, wow, man, this is great. What's gonna happen? And you can tell there's still the tension there, but then by the end of it, there's this respect because he throws in the towel, and then Rocky realizes, oh, he's learned from his mistakes. And then, of course, the cameo with Brigitte Nielsen was just so heartbreaking. So I think there's a lot going on for this movie, and I think that there's a lot going on in the Drago family side, which is great. And then they kind of, I don't know, they kind of switched up the locations. I think a lot of people wanted Creed training in the snow for this one, but instead they did the desert. I get why they did that because they're trying to switch it up and do the opposite. But for some reason, I got this vibe. Like even after the movie, I was talking with my friends. I still remember this, and like we wanted him to train in the snow. We really wanted him to train in the snow. I was like, wow, it's that iconic, huh? So there's something to that where Rocky's training in the snow in Rocky 4 that they kind of wanted in the modern generation, but instead we got it in the desert, which is fine, But yeah, and just kind of like creating this new character in Drago Jr. and having him come back in 3. Like you could easily do a show based around Duke and Drago running a school with like, Creed coming in every now and then as a supporting role in the show. I can easily see that because we know that, I mean, based on his Duke's experience from The Wire and how he kind of led his portion of The Wire in terms of where, because The Wire is very much broken up into different kind of sections within the show in terms of writing, but in terms of like his area of where The Wire takes place, he was pretty much the lead in that kind of area. So he can definitely like, lead the charge in the show. So that's kind of where I see that if they ever want to do that. But if they don't want to focus on Rocky and he's asking for too much money or something like, or Stallone's asking for too much money, you can do this kind of thing and still tell a great Rocky story within the franchise because there's still some great characters there. And I think Rocky 4, or excuse me, I think Creed 2 did a lot to kind of build this universe, because I mean, based on what we saw in this one, we actually see Drago Jr. and Creed become friends. So, and it's all based on the 2 fights they had here out of mutual respect, so that they build that up. So there's a lot going on. I think Creed 2 is not nearly as good as the first Creed, obviously, or even Creed 3, but I think it does a lot of world building.
Yeah, I think it expands the world. I wish we had got more Tessa Thompson. I think that's one of the things that 3 does well. I think it really brings Tessa Thompson back to the forefront. I think she gets backgrounded a little bit here, and I think it's unfortunate. I mean, I think that also ultimately Tessa Thompson gets more to do in the Creed franchise than Talia Shire, which is good. I think that's a huge positive in terms of comparing the two, but in this one she's background, and I think that's what has hindered my enjoyment. And quite honestly, I think for me, Rocky Balboa, especially this most recent rewatch, really just made me appreciate the totality of what that movie was trying to do in terms of Rocky's journey and putting kind of a button on it. I mean, I get the idea of, okay, Rocky 5 was so bad, we're just going to wait a few years and we're going to do a Rocky Balboa to kind of give this character a proper ending. If Rocky Balboa was the last movie in the franchise, I think it would have actually been a perfect ending. I think that turning him into a supporting character in the Creed franchise works, and I think it was good for everybody involved. But I do think Rocky Balboa is an appropriate ending in a lot of ways to him as a fighter, and just bringing him back to this place of not really where he was in the first one because he has all of this life experience, but I think you feel like the modesty is there much more so. Like Sylvester Stallone is not in like 1980s, I have to compete with Arnold Schwarzenegger and get all the movies that he is doing and things of that nature. Like he's in a different place in 2006, and I think it really shows. And I think you see the maturity in terms of his directing. I think you see the maturity in terms of his behavior as the Rocky character. I'm just a really big fan of Rocky Balboa, and I think it's a little bit better than Creed 2. I think Creed 2 is really strong in terms of being a sequel, but for me, there's it feels like there are certain moments in Creed 2 that don't always necessarily ring true. And yeah, I think in terms of storytelling, I also think Creed 2 is too long. I think that might be in terms of like, I mean, it's not as bad, but definitely Creed 2. I was like, did this movie really need to be over 2 hours? Because I don't really think it did. But anything else to say about these two before we move on?
No, I think we pretty much covered it all. I think Creed 2, especially for me, like just seeing Drago, man, really, really got me nostalgic in the best possible way, because we, growing up, we used to think he was a bastard, son of a bitch. He killed in cold blood, but you realize he was just kind of like this conflicted soul kind of thing going on, and they and especially with that Brigitte Nielsen cameo, the way they explain that whole background of how she kind of just used him politically in their marriage. I mean, really was fucked up. So I think they did a lot of good in making you sympathetic towards his character.
You got to wonder if Sylvester Stallone wrote that, because, he and Brigitte Nielsen used to be married.
I've seen Cobra. I have seen Cobra.
So I think we have the same number 3. Is it Creed 3? Is Creed 3 your number 3?
Yeah. And look, when I first saw this, I was just kind of blown away, thinking like this might have been the best directed Rocky movie in any of the franchises. I had to take a couple steps back, because apparently I was very impressed with the anime type stuff they were doing at the end, but not a lot of people are feeling it. So I kind of have to weigh that in. I get not a lot of people. I mean, obviously there's some like inside baseball type references for anime in terms of what Michael B. Jordan was doing, because he clearly, like in interviews, has like stated it. But some people weren't feeling it. Some people are not anime fans. I get it. And it didn't click for some people, the way that fight kind of ended. But overall, I think still, like, the direction was incredible. I think that stepping away, like truly stepping away from Rocky in this one was the right move, because I felt like adding Rocky would have been too much, and just having the focus on Michael B. Jordan, his story, and you kind of see this Triple H like role that he's grown into. And then I was joking about that, but it's very true. Like, he's doing the Triple H. He's kind of doing the wrestling.
Well, this is what athletes do now. I mean, LeBron James does the same thing, where he's not just a player, but he's also like in ownership. He's involved in all these companies. So I think in a lot of ways, I think Adonis Creed is the perfect distillation of what the modern athlete has become in terms of hashtag branding and all of that stuff. So that felt really true to life, that this is who he would become. His daughter is great. I really want a show with his daughter fighting. I think that would be tremendous.
And maybe Duke can train her on that show, man, with Drago Jr. in the background being a coach. You never know.
Yeah, the daughter's great. I love.
And a deaf fighter would be a tremendous new way to interpret like a boxing character in 2023.
Yeah, I think that's the other cool thing about the Creed franchise, is that they really have embraced the idea of differently abled people, in terms of like Tessa Thompson's character losing her hearing, her daughter, the daughter being deaf. I think those are really good things. The use of sign language throughout the movie, I think, is really, really impressive. And yeah, this might also have my favorite fight, which I don't want to get into too much, given the Jonathan Majors situation. But some really good psychology in this movie, and yeah, I was wholly impressed. I think for me, the problem with the anime is that you have 2 live action people in a computer, and it looked really strange. It looked muddy. When you are trying to have a realistic movie and then you just have this, I think it really stands out. Like, the whole Dodger Stadium sequence felt very strange, because it didn't feel like we were actually in Dodger Stadium. And I think that's part of the issue. If this was an animated movie, then I don't think it would have been a problem. If the movie was just wholly unrealistic from the start, like, I think of a movie like Speed Racer. If this had happened in a movie like Speed Racer, I wouldn't have noticed, because the whole movie is kind of a live action cartoon anyway. But they were striving for this realism, and they were striving for something very different than any of the Rocky sequels. Like, look at Creed 3 compared to Rocky 3, and there's such a difference in terms of how the movie is grounded. But I appreciate the effort. I appreciate the fact that Michael B. Jordan is at least trying something different and trying to give this epic feel it's unfortunate. I really like this movie. It is extremely unfortunate with everything that is going on with Jonathan Majors, that it feels like if that situation continues to deteriorate, I think Creed 3 is going to kind of be forgotten.
It's unfortunate because I was really pushing this for Oscar, contention when this movie came out, and I'm kind of quiet about it now, but we'll kind of see where things play out. But I think still, like, he did the tremendous. I think for what, this is a directing debut, right, for Michael B. Jordan. In terms of a directing debut, like, this is one of the best, like, ever. And I think that, even the cinematography is like way better than most of the Rocky movies. And I point to this one scene where I think it's, I'm not sure it's a Dodger Stadium or not, but they're in an arena, and there's this like wall in the middle of the frame that's kind of breaking up into two different rooms, and you see the distance between the two characters and the distance they actually feel, not just like between with the wall between them, but like, as a metaphor. So that kind of shit was like, wow, this guy knows how to, like, do things on the screen. I mean, visually use it as a metaphor to help tell the story and show like the distance between the characters. I was like, this is one of the most simple things in the movie, and I don't think anyone's noticing what's going on here except for me. So I really appreciated that kind of like cinematography and the way it was shot, and just his approach. And I felt like there was always movement in the camera, and I felt like the storyline especially felt like, kind of like a Hogan Savage type feel, you know what I mean? Something like that, like a Sid Justice Hogan. I know I'm going with the old school WWF references, but that's the easiest one to compare it to.
I think we talked about, I think I sent you gifs of Savage attacking Hogan around the time this movie came out.
Yeah, and it feels like it, right? And I know that's ridiculous, but there's something about these kind of storylines that even happen in real life, situations where it's like this dude comes from your past. You're trying to make good with him, but he has that grudge against you that you've had since you were kids or whatever, and then it manifests. You know what I mean? And things like that happen in real life, and in this case, it just manifests in the boxing world. And yeah, it actually works out very well. And like, you can do this kind of storyline in wrestling and still make it work. So in terms of that, like, yeah, this was just a great, because I mentioned how much I like Rocky 3 and Rocky 4 for the sports entertainment aspects. This does that, but mixes it with the grounding level-headedness of the first Rocky. So when you combine that in the right mix, I think you get an accomplishment like this. And I feel like this is an accomplishment as a film. But again, I don't know if it's going to be overlooked. But like, to me, like, I haven't watched a whole bunch of movies this year, but it's this movie and Air that are kind of like my favorites, and like that I can watch multiple times and just enjoy it, because it's just, there's so many things going on the screen that I really appreciate the direction by Michael B. Jordan.
And how about Creed's mom on her deathbed calling him Apollo?
That's not. I tried to ignore that because that was so sad. But I mean, it's
emotional wreck after that moment.
I know it again. It's the emotional manipulation, but it's not like we all haven't been there. You know what I mean? Especially at the ages we're getting to, we're all gonna have that moment. I've had similar moments like that. So yeah, I mean, even the way it was shot looked incredibly real too, as well. And like the phone call, and like you anticipating the phone call kind of thing. Oh man, just great stuff.
All right, Brian, the drama's building. We are at our top two. So again, for me, these are two of the greatest movies of all time. So don't take it as a slight. Brian, what is your number two in this franchise?
Tough decision, but I'm going to go with Creed at number 2.
Wow. I went with Rocky. Rocky is my number 2.
Well, here's the thing. Like, I always forget that. Look, I mean, I don't know if this is like a positive or negative to you, but Stallone wrote Rocky in what, 3 days? You know what I mean? It's
he did. I'm sure it was. I mean, he physically wrote it, but there's got to be a process where, like, this story, after seeing Wetmer fight Ali, like, clearly this story is like manifesting through his head. He's combining certain autobiographical elements, like, very, very clearly something else is going on here. But yes, technically he did write it in 3 days.
Yeah, so that's still to this day, like, always, like, that's the one thing I'll remember about him in the writing process. Like, despite all these interviews about his writing process, and he could be a great writer sometimes and just a really shitty writer at times. But for him to come up with a script in 3 days and kind of having this lasting legacy, like, as an all-time, not just an all-time great movie, but an all-time great script, like, it's hard. What do you mean? Like it's like Michael or Ryan Coogler had what decades to come up with that story, but Stallone did it in 3 days. So I don't know. That kind of just out. I don't know if it's a positive or negative, like I said, but for me, that kind of shifted the balance me towards saying Rocky was slightly better, just because I felt like you had to start somewhere, and with a legendary start like that, and to do it to come up with it in 3 days. Like, imagine if he just had this idea of a movie and just ignored it. You know what I mean? Some of us do that, have these ideas and just ignore it. But for those 3 days, he changed history. So that's kind of where my take on it is. And of course, Creed. Creed is an amazing movie. Like, bringing the franchise back and doing so many things emotionally to me, watching that for the first time in the theater and just being an emotional wreck, not realizing how much Apollo Creed meant to me as a kid, but seeing it from a different perspective. And then I think what I'll always remember from Creed is the shadow boxing at the beginning when he's watching the footage of his dad. Like, that to me is just like, oh, heart-wrenching stuff, man. But to bring Stallone back and the cancer stuff and him getting the Oscar nomination, it was just like this achievement. And it showed that Stallone still had it, and it showed that Michael B. Jordan was on the rise, and it gave people confidence in Ryan Coogler, and because of this performance as a director, got him the Black Panther job. So there's a lot of historical things for these two movies, but in the end, I think Rocky kind of wins out for me, just because of its legendary status and establishing all the characters and establishing the steps and every legendary moment and the theme, all that stuff. So that's kind of where I'm at. And maybe in 10 years, 5 years from now, I'll flip that over, and just depending on my mood. But right now, Creed #2, Rocky #1.
I think it's such a fascinating experience watching these two movies, because it almost goes without saying, but without Rocky, Creed doesn't exist. And I think that's true. But I think in a lot of ways, what Ryan Coogler did by creating Adonis Creed is not only did he allow the franchise to continue, but I think in a lot of ways he has turned the Rocky Creed franchise into one of the most viable still going in 2023. I look at the struggles of a lot of movies that have come out over the course of this summer, and a lot of box office bombs straight up from a lot of franchises. And I think the essence of what makes Rocky work is that Rocky doesn't need to cost $300 million. And I think the cool thing about the Creed franchise is that even more so than Rocky, it is so character focused, and you become invested in who Tessa Thompson and what she's doing. You become invested in Michael B. Jordan. You become invested in all of the characters, and bringing back Duke and bringing back the Drago family and bringing back Rocky, and you just become reinvested in all of these characters again. And like, there's so much rich stuff to pull from. You look at those early interactions, the fact that Rocky really doesn't want to train Adonis at first, and just the tension that exists there. But then they form this familial bond, and then, Rocky, like, spoilers for Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. Just like Indiana Jones, Rocky has kind of accepted the fact that he's going to die. And I think it's funny that of the two movies where he gets punched, where the titular legendary hero who wants to die, the one who gets punched in the face is in fact Indiana Jones, not Rocky. But Creed basically convinces Rocky what he has to live for, and the fact that they are both gonna kind of train together. And I think it's really it's a hard watch. Like, Rocky's going to a very dark place, and it's hard. It's a really hard thing to see, but it's inspiring too. And I just think that what Ryan Coogler was able to do in so many ways was really impressive. I don't know if it's more impressive than what Stallone did, but I mean, Rocky is based off of Chuck Wepner, and Adonis Creed is kind of based off, taking different elements of this franchise. So I think in a lot of ways, both are adaptations. And it's so funny to me that Creed came out a month before The Force Awakens, and just the legacies of these franchises and these movies, and just our perceptions of them. And just, I mean, the fact is Force Awakens made a lot more money than Creed, but I can't help but think in a lot of ways how Creed is going to be the better remembered. And I'm going to talk about Rocky in just a minute, but I got to say, Brian, I'm pretty pissed that Stallone didn't win an Academy Award for being Rocky. That grinds my gears tremendously.
Well, he could win an Emmy.
I mean, I don't think he's not going to win an Emmy for playing Rocky. You are never going to see Rocky.
You never know these days. You never know these days. He can make up with that producer. You never know.
I just don't think it's going to happen. I don't think he's going to ever get.
Well, I think one person we also got to mention though, really quick, is Ludwig Göransson, because he did the music for Creed 1, 2, and I think 3 as well. But I mean, he's on the rise as one of the best composers in the business right now in terms of for movies. Black Panther was an accomplishment on its own. So, I mean, this guy's totally on the rise. And I mean, that Creed soundtrack was just unbelievable as well, especially when he remixed the Rocky theme at the end of the last fight. Oof, oof. I remember the crowd going nuts for that. So, yeah, credit to him for bringing the nostalgia back in the music and also making it modern with like that, the training montages in Creed 1. Phenomenal stuff.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, Creed is just a miracle of a movie. Rocky 1 is even more of a miracle. I think we could talk about Rocky 1 for hours, but we really has a lot to add. I mean, won Best Picture. The fact that this movie won Best Picture in 1977 over Network and All the President's Men. Like, that's the wild thing is I love Rocky. It's in my 100 favorite, but it is my number 3 movie of 1976. It's really, really wild to think about that. I mean, Rocky 1 is just, it's funny to think that Sylvester Stallone became like this big action guy who was going to compete with Arnold Schwarzenegger. When if you watch Rocky 1, it's like, okay, this guy's going to be like, he's going to be in the Al Pacino lane. Like, he's going to be doing these small, like, gritty New York type movies. And that just didn't happen. It's funny to think of just where his career developed and becoming like Rambo and Rocky and doing Cliffhanger and Cobra and all these huge action movies, and just how different that all came across when, I don't know, maybe if he has a success after Rocky that isn't an action movie, maybe his career goes in a different direction. But boy, oh boy, it's crazy to think of where Stallone, where his career turned out, given where it started. And I mean, the first movie, it's one of the best sports movies of all time for a reason. And there's definitely some weird moments with the mafia guys and some not so great moments with Paulie and Adrian. But I think this movie just, it works for a reason. It's going to be regarded as a classic in perpetuity for a good reason. Like there's a reason there have been 8 movies based off of this one, because it just works. So yeah, goes without saying, a huge fan of both, but for me, Creed edges out Rocky by just a little bit. But again, you're talking about, for me, 2 of the best movies, 2 of my favorite movies that have ever been made.
I also wanted to mention, like, I think I mentioned this before, but there's something about Rocky waking up at 5 in the morning or 4 in the morning, like looking like he's just so tired. He drinks an egg, and then boom, the music kicks in. There's just something about it that's inspiring, that I think a lot of, workout heads use that kind of scene as like motivation, and they use the whole Rocky franchise as kind of like this workout motivation. I get it. I totally get it. And like, for what it is in terms of like the workout exercise world and like the sports world and the geek world, like it combines all these different worlds together, where if it feels like an audience can be a mix of like, movie nerds and sports geeks and still love the Rocky franchise. And that's kind of cool. So that's kind of where I think like it makes a lot of the money, is because it draws in all these different audiences. And, even though Rocky's not a real historical sports figure, he's treated as such. And that's why, like on ESPN and shit like that, whenever they do those things, like, and they mention like a Rocky or something like that, people tune in, you know what I mean? So there's something about this character that people love. And now it's kind of like the love is spreading to Adonis. So that's great. And I think the torches have been passed. And yeah, and I mean, if you look back at just the nominations for the original movie: Best Picture, Best Director, Best Actor, Best Actress, Best Supporting Actor, Best Original Screenplay, Best Film Editing, Best Original Song, Best Sound, just like an incredible, like it deserves all of it. And it's just like, is it the best sports movie of all time? Yeah, it's up for debate, because I know people will say Raging Bull or whatever, but I don't know if Raging Bull makes you feel as good as the end of Rocky 1 does. So that's what I'm going to say. But yeah, and then, of course, Rocky is the greatest sports theme of all time, most iconic, recognizable sports theme of all time, I would say. So, and combine all that, it's just like a legendary movie. And like, I like Network a lot, but I don't know. I just feel like Network is something you watch in your 40s and 50s when you're going through a divorce or something, or just feel like you're in a midlife crisis. But yeah, that's kind of what Network is. But if you want to feel good at the end,
You are out of your mind for that take. That's all I'm going to say. Network is incredible.
It's an incredible movie, but it's so
one of the greatest scripts
by the end.
It is, but that's the whole point. And like the fact that it was made in 1976, but it still applies. So much of what that movie has to say still applies to this day.
I still don't like the fact that dude cheated on her and they had that whole conversation. Whatever. We can talk about Network another time.
There's the speech in that movie is just unbelievable. We could get into that another time, but yeah, I'm glad we have to talk about Bill Conti. I mean, that score, just the actual Rocky score, the score when a fight ends, like other than John Williams, like this is probably one of the most iconic scores in the history of American cinema, probably. And I don't think there really is much of a debate. And I think one of the reasons that Rocky 4 and 5 kind of lose something is because you're not really getting a lot of Bill Conti in those movies. So, I mean, yeah, that's it. That's our ranking of the 9 Rocky Creed movies. And I think it's funny that in both of our lists, the Creed movies were in our top half, all 3 Creed movies. So I think that says a lot. And yeah, let's just pretend Rocky 5 doesn't exist.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about that briefly, but goddamn, Measure of a Man or not, that movie is just, again, even the video game did not make it better, even with the rewriting of history and all that stuff. So,
all right, any final thoughts on this franchise? All I can say is that just in thinking about this, it's a real pleasure. I could sit down tonight and just watch I could watch 8 of these 9 movies easily. I always skip Rocky 5. Let's be honest. I'm never going to watch Rocky 5 again.
I guess one way is to do a quick prediction. Do you think we get a show next or another movie next in the next 5 years?
I would say that we are going to get another movie. I very much feel like because of the success of Creed 3, there is going to be a desire to make another movie. And I think if Michael B. Jordan can organize a situation where he gets to direct another movie and possibly get kind of a blank check to do something else, I feel like he would take that deal. If not, get to produce his own TV show or, direct a pilot for a TV show. So I would guess there is going to be a movie, but it is also very clear that we are moving in the direction because Amazon owns MGM now. We are going to get a Rocky TV series, or like not a Rocky TV series, but like some sort of a spinoff in the Rocky universe. It's going to happen. I don't know if that's going to work. I mean, again, there are very few TV shows based on movie franchises that have actually worked for me. Maybe this will be different, but I would rather just stay a movie franchise. I think that's what's worked. There's no reason to rock the boat.
I do see the series coming because Amazon is really pushing it, but it depends on what series. I don't want to see a young Rocky series. I would definitely prefer the Duke family and where they're at now. You know what I mean? Just like that school, and you can bring in Drago as a trainer and just bring in the smaller characters and kind of focus on them, and then have Michael B. Jordan as Adonis kind of pop in now and then. So that's kind of what I want to see. You know what I mean? Just like a modern school in the world of Rocky and kind of like adapting and, throw in some modern sports entertainment, isms, and, you can make fun of whoever in boxing right now. There's a lot going on. I mean, you can make fun of a lot of different things in boxing right now. So, and not necessarily poke fun of it, but just kind of satirize it, play with it. And I think a show like, a Rocky type show can obviously play with that. So that's kind of where I see it going. Because if they do make another movie, I want to see it about his daughter. I don't want to see another movie about him at this point, because it felt like all the focus at the end of that was about his daughter, and we're all behind his daughter. And the fact that she gets in is like, if she does like an Olympic run kind of thing. I think that'd be great because then you're kind of doing it for country and everything, and then the fact that she's deaf and then going through all these different things. I think there's a lot of story to tell there, as opposed to her just going for some world titles. So, and I think she's. I mean, if you wait long enough, she'll be at that right age where a lot of these athletes, anyway, when they do Olympic training, they're in like their early 20s, late teens. So that's perfect for what that story can tell.
Yeah, I would definitely want to see a show about the daughter, if not a movie. And I think that is clearly the direction the ending of Creed 3 was going in. And let's keep the train rolling. So thanks, everybody, for listening. Next week, before we go, we will be talking about 11 Fast movies. Brian, are you fired up?
I'm fired up. I have to do some homework still, but I'm excited to do the homework because, I mean, look, these movies go by fast and they're furious and they're stupid, but I mean, I'll confuse some of them. But for some reason, I think the last movie on my list that I'm going to watch is Fast 3 because that's the one that's been the most retcon of death. So it makes the least amount of sense to watch it last. And with a franchise that doesn't make much sense anyways, might as well go out of order.
So, yes, next week we will be talking about Dwayne Johnson, Vin Diesel, and everybody else who's been a part of the franchise, Paul Walker, of course. So for Brian, my name is Jerome. Thank you so much for listening. We will talk to you again next week.
So we're not going to talk about Rocky VII, Adrian's Revenge?